Hello everyone, welcome to this session on IoT, AI and ML in the context of 5G manufacturing. My name is James Blackman, I'm editor of Enterprise IT Insights. We have 35 minutes odd on the clock, a little bit longer if we go into the break, but we have lots to get through. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel for this session. We have with us Corey Cook, Senior Program Manager and Solutions Architect with Lockheed Martin. Stephen Mellor, Chief Technical Officer for the Industry IoT Consortium, the IIC. Stephen Piasenten, Chief Strategy Officer for Accedian. And Phil Skipper, Group Head of IoT Strategy and Business Development at Vodafone Business. Thank you all for joining us. Let's start by looking quickly at that title of this session and some of these terms, IoT, AI, ML, and 5G, of course. And just if we begin with AI and ML, which seem alternatively somewhat nebulous and perhaps rather precise. Stephen, if we start with you, are we even talking about AI in kind of practical terms today? Or is AI really just a kind of a catch-all, a marketing term, if you like, for the more aspirational results we're looking to capture from some of these digital, inputs from the IoT sensing, if you like, and the ML sense making? And maybe just if you can, Stephen, give us a sense of the IIC's work with ML in Industry 4.
Okay. Well, I think the answer to your first question is both. Of course, it's a marketing term. It has to be. And if it's a marketing term, almost by definition, it needs to be fuzzy. Because the last thing you want to say to somebody is, this is the correct definition, and you want to buy this. And the person says, well, actually, I don't think that's the right definition. I think something else. So it's definitely a marketing term. I think that it's somewhat nebulous in the sense that everyone can put onto that term whatever they like. I'm a veteran of the method wars. And I remember people arguing about what makes something object-oriented. Bertrand Meyer, one of the very famous people in that area, insisted that to be object-oriented, you have to have automatic garbage collection. Well, that's lovely, but I work in real-time systems. I'm not getting real-time garbage collection. That's stupid. I can have everything else, but I'm not object-oriented. So let's fight. Hooray! That's a completely pointless fight. It makes zero difference. The trick is to get down to what the different techniques are and try to understand how each of them works. So you're talking about machine learning, ML, and also deep learning. The way in which I understand it, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert here, is that AI contains these several things and undoubtedly more approaches. Machine learning then is a kind of AI. Typically, it is not incredibly complicated. It needs training. And deep learning is a kind of machine learning that uses neural networks to mimic the human brain in some manner. Obviously, it's not a complete correct model. But it kind of follows some of those ideas of collecting neutron firings and so on. Neuron firings, sorry, not neutron. So I'd see AI as the overall term, ML as the kind of relatively simple stuff that we're using today. It needs data, needs to be tagged, all that good stuff. And deep learning to be the one involving neural networks needs a little bit less human interaction to make it work. Now, I note from what we have here that there are a number of questions later on about the different kinds of places where we're using AI in the IIC. Would you like me to do that now or later?
Let's do it later. Let's come back to that, should we, Stephen, just in the interest of time. But look, Phil, I mean, if we take the other side of this and the kind of the connectivity part, and talk about 5G in terms of IoT, because IoT gets conflated with all kinds of low-level sensing and this kind of stuff, a lot of which Vodafone's bringing to the table as well, of course. But just where does 5G fit into IoT, if you can, Phil, and how much does it matter ultimately? Is 5G the headline piece, the top of the iceberg, or is it the key to everything, if you like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what we have to do is to carve these things up in not what the technology is, but what are you trying to do with it? And I think this is particularly true in the manufacturing space. So With IoT, you're linking devices up and you're getting data. The question is, what do you want to do with that data? When you look at what 5G also does with IoT, it opens up this third use case, which is really about control. So from the manufacturing perspective, 5G brings a number of different perspectives. So one, it enables you to control things in the factory. So as factories move from work in progress to work in motion, i.e. the flexible factories of the future, you need a way of controlling things much more dynamically. And 5G gives you that, especially as a private network. It also gives you the bandwidth to move large amounts of data around, be this execution data or whether it's quality data around the system. So you can support things like digital twins, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on. But then I think the other nice thing about it is it gives you this guaranteed quality of service. So it enables you to link up the upstream supply chain with the downstream supply chain. So I think what you have to do is to stop looking at 5G and IoT as a technology and look at it as an operational asset upon which you base your manufacturing process. And I think that's really the key to actually understanding what 5G is, but more importantly, what it does in terms of moving you on this journey towards Industry 4.0 and truly flexible manufacture.
Okay, and I mean, Phil, you kind of talked around some of the control aspects of 5G and this kind of stuff. I mean, Richard, you know, maybe if we look at the, you know, try and distinguish 5G from LTE, for instance, because, you know, and really to show how far and how high Industry 4, you know, might go with all of this, because a lot of the new Industry 4 market remains on LTE as it stands, even, you know, even if there's an upgrade path. But, you know, if you look at the CBRS in the US, most of that's on LTE, or all of that's on LTE, I believe, at the moment. I mean, Richard, you're involved in the 5G Encode project in the UK, which we've written about quite extensively, you know, and that's just transitioned, I believe, from LTE to 5G. Can you talk about what you're seeing and what you expect to see in terms of, you know, performance uplift and kind of new use cases and this kind of stuff?
Absolutely. So first of all, just for the audience, the 5G Encode Project, really exciting project based in the UK, and it's really designed around the idea of making the manufacturing use cases available to manufacturers in the UK, and really give UK manufacturing a leg up on the rest of the industry on automation and business performance improvement as a consequence of it. When we think about our own role in the Encode project, you can think of Accedian Skylight Solutions as really the we talk a lot about advanced use cases for 5G and automation, and I'll give you a couple of examples that I think are quite interesting that are enabled by 5G versus LTE. But when you think about the nature of the promise, right, the foundational difference between prior technologies and the utilization of 5G in these manufacturing environments is that prior technologies, no matter how well engineered, were not deterministic from a performance perspective. Okay, now you could force all your users off of a network, you can make sure that maximum available bandwidth, but, you know, as anybody who's got an RF background will tell you, you would still have performance aberrations. You didn't get guaranteed quality of service. And for certain use cases, that's okay, right? You just need broadband availability that's wireless. 4G LTE, no problem, right? I can connect low data rate IoT sensors in non-PLC like environments where, you know, if you miss a single message in a programmable logic controller environment, you have a process problem. You can't do that on LTE, right? Because you have no guaranteed delivery, as well as not having guaranteed performance itself. So 5G brings, and the easiest way for me to describe it to non-technical people is 5G finally turns the radio access network into a well-behaved Ethernet cable. It's not very sexy, but in reality, it is the first time that a public WAN set of technologies can do that. Accedian's role in all of this is we have the performance management system that if you are establishing these high value, highly reliability and delivery sensitive applications, you're going to want to be able to prove that the network itself is performing the way you need it to. So that's what we do. We're a real-time service assurance platform across all the technologies associated with 5G, from compute, networking to radio. And we are really the glue that binds, from a performance perspective, into the systems that are being deployed in the testbed. One really important component to all of that is none of this will be a reality without closed loop automation. So ensuring that the applications themselves, whatever they may be, know what their performance actually is in real time is very important. If for some reason a radio base station that's critical to performance stops functioning, it's really important that the ML, as Stephen was talking about, that's driving the recently retrofitted AGV, it's almost as important for it to know what's in its environment as well as to know when it's not functioning, because then the systems know to stop. That's really important from a safety perspective as well. So I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. I like that, the well-behaved Ethernet cable. That helps me out a whole lot. Corey, just as the enterprise on this panel, you know, and you're kind of bringing a lot of this stuff home, and you've got this project out in California with your skunkworks kind of smart factory. I know you're doing it more widely than that, but just, you know, talk to me about the vision from an enterprise point of view, if you like. And, you know, I'm just with the skunkworks thing. There was no mention actually of 5G in the press note, which is interesting enough these days in an announcement about smart factories, you know. But you know, I just wonder, talk to us around the role that 5G is going to play in the kinds of IoT, AI / ML use cases you think you know these kind of technologies will support.
Sure. So just as you mentioned with the skunkworks facility, I think that's our vision of having a very dynamic utilitarian manufacturing process that can change very quickly, but do so in an almost effortless manner. But it has to take, and a great example of that is, and what we're doing at skunkworks is indicative of what we're trying to do across the corporation. Quick example with Aero Fort Worth producing the F-35. You know, there's multiple variations of the F-35, and if you think about how you are changing the production line in one facility for each of those modifications, the entire supply chain for that aircraft and the supporting equipment and the autonomous systems, all of those change with each one of those variants. So you have to, we learned very quickly that there's a tremendous amount of obstacles whenever you're trying to do something like that. So we've worked through a lot of those, and the skunkworks is now kind of becoming that hallmark of that future factory, that ability to take not only large scale production, but also small scale production, which I think is key. I think so often we talk about 5G and we talk about large manufacturing, but the real power is actually how it will enable small manufacturing processes to be highly efficient, much more productive, make use of their resources in a much more intelligent way. I think that's key. The issue I think with 5G is that with good comes some problems to some degree. So one of the things I'll say with that is that the immense amount of information that comes from 5G is just massive. I'll give you an example. We're running an autonomous warehouse project, and the robot that we employed was running on a 5G network. And so there's the benefits of that were, one, we were able to enhance our production operation by close to 400%, which was just unparalleled. But just one robot in that operation was actually obtaining and processing 20 terabytes of data per day. That's an immense amount of information. And then what do you do with it? And that's really what becomes key. And that's why I'm so excited about 5G, because we have all these systems today that are producing immense amounts of information, but it just sits there. 5G gives us truly that opportunity to employ AI and analytics that allow us to actually make that usable and discernible information, so which is key. And when you go back to the skunkworks facility, even though they didn't mention 5G, I think it wasn't mentioned because it was just accepted as a norm of the process. It is embedded in everything that they do, from AR, VR processes. Visualization is key there. So 5G is an enabling component that is just built into the very foundation of the skunkworks facility.
Okay. I've got a question here about, the value it's going to deliver, but I feel like you've covered all of that. That's really comprehensive. It's interesting to hear you talk about the kind of flexible production side and this kind of thing, because it becomes, a lot of the talk sounds quite fanciful when it gets into, fold up, fold down factories and this kind of stuff. But you're saying that, this is really being brought to bear now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the future is visualization and information from my perspective. If you're not embodied in those two elements, you're already out of the game. And we're employing new technologies now. To give you an example, when you talked about IoT, being able to acquire all the sensor data of all of your systems, to know where all of your equipment is, to know where all of everything in your supply chain is. But then we're taking that one step further, and we're actually feeding that into a holographic visualization environment. So we're actually able to see it in new terms, and then be able to share that data out, not just amongst the one facility, but all the facilities in various formats. I mean, it is literally changing the way we communicate and the way we think of these processes. And then being able then, if you can imagine this holographic visualization, for example, that we're doing, then I can tie in analytic data in there that's telling me what my platform status is or my installation status is, and do so in a way that I'm able to have multiple people collaborate in those same environments. That's what 5G is bringing to us today.
Okay, I mean, just Stephen, I've got to ask you, because we caught up a couple of years ago at kind of a hype-filled kind of trade event, where they were talking about 5G, and you very nicely kind of commented on the 5G story and said, I think the headline was 5G, my indifference is unbounded. Do you know what I mean? And and you had this line about the tech industry living on fear and fashion. I just wonder, you've run the tests on 5G, with the IIC. Do you stand by that statement, or does 5G bring something different? Just put that in context for everyone a little bit if you can. And then also, a question about all of these test beds you're doing, the IIC is doing on networking, on edge, on security, all this kind of stuff. Has the conversation shifted now from the technology? How much work is there still to do? Is Industry 4 primed, from a tech point of view yet? And I'm aware that's a somewhat naive question, because the technology evolves always and there's lots still to come in. But, is it as much now about mapping the technology solution to the problem, if you like?
Okay, so there's three questions in there as I heard it. The first one is around technology, what has changed and so on. The second one is around, do I stand by my indifference is unbounded? And third, test beds. So let me see if I can take them one at a time. In respect to technology, it always changes. Listening to the prior two speakers, I picked up two things that I thought were important. One of them was that they're talking about new factories. The typical manufacturing facility is 19 years old. You'll be lucky to have 2G. A lot of them don't even have IP. I mean, no. Now, in a new factory, in a new facility, clearly, this makes a huge amount of difference, and that's really, really important. And it's great. And that leads me to my second part of this, namely that when we think about this, and I heard two phrases here, one was operational asset, another was an enabling component. As a technologist, I tend to get excited about those two ideas. I mean, it's really one idea, we call them digital transformation enablers. But the thing that we're really after is what makes a difference in the business. Yeah, I can get excited by 5G, and my indifference might diminish somewhat as I learn more about what it does and how it does it. But in the end, what we're concerned about is actually delivering widgets. So where does 5G help us in that area? Now, again, we've seen from the prior two speakers a very clear statement of how it is helping in new facilities. That's not the vast majority of things. And that's why I say, from my perspective, it's just another technology. Next year, it'll be 6G. Next year, it'll be 7G. And there'll be even more conferences with piles and piles and piles of hype. And it all gets very exciting until somebody moves on to the next thing. And this is, again, one of these things, I said this in my first answer. It's really important, I think, to break down what it is that we're doing. to understand not the marketing term that sits above these things, but what we're trying to do. Richard made an excellent argument as to why you absolutely have to have, absolutely have to know when your packet is going to get delivered, otherwise everything breaks down. Absolutely right. Well, 5G is one way of doing it. Time-sensitive networking is another idea that's around that. I'm sure there will be more. So when I think about each one of these technologies, I think, what's the business purpose? Let me sort that out first. And then by the time I figured that out, probably I even have a new technology. Then you asked about test beds. That's the third question. I mentioned time-sensitive networking. We have two facilities. One is in Stuttgart, the other in Austin. We run regular plug fests on those, and then provide requirements to Avenue, AVNU, which is the standards development organization that does this kind of stuff. We have a smart mold injection test bed, which is using AI. I can't tell you exactly what it's doing because each of our test beds are scaled down real world implementations, but they're owned by the members. IIC doesn't have access to the IP. I can't tell you all of the details, but this one's been fairly interesting. We have a video intelligence test drive, which is a solution, and it's being used in respect of worker safety. And it's also being extended in the days of the dreaded virus to help us understand social distancing within offices where people are actually going there. The third one I'd like to mention, because I'm running out of my 2 minutes, is the negotiation automation platform. This is one run through Japan, and it relies on another test bed that was based in Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. And the idea here is to say, I have a requirement for these widgets, and then to negotiate with different suppliers to bring those widgets together and then get everything to work out. So rather than being a factory, it's kind of a meta factory where you say, this is what I want to make, you bid, let's sort out the logistics. Okay, I accept this one. I thought that was good, but now I'm going to reject that now because it doesn't fit in with everything else. Anyway, you go from there. We have at the IIC, last sentence, a journal of innovation, which comes out 3 times a year. There is an excellent paper in there that describes digital transformation in practice, and it lists all 3 of those test beds, and that should be out by the end of the month, so you can get more detail from there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. And for just to pick up perhaps on Stephen's point about factories having lots of legacy equipment and contending with kind of slow upgrade cycles and this kind of stuff. Just talk to me a little bit, about the kind of sales process, if you like, and how that negotiation's going. Is because it seems to me that all of these things, there is a perfect storm, we are told, of new kind of technologies, and there is something different in this wave of automation, if you like. And is that something now which enterprises understand? Is the ROI, if you like, easy for them to write down or simpler for them to write down? How much of the work you're doing today is about showing them their money is going to be well spent, if you like?
It's unclear to whom you're addressing that question, but I'll just...
Sorry, that's to Phil, Stephen.
I'm sorry, thank you. Go ahead, Phil.
So I think there's a couple of things here. One is you don't have to go and move to 5G for everything all at once. And I think when you're talking about manufacturing, it's a relatively secure process. What you don't want to do in any form of manufacturing is change everything at once. What we're finding is that new processes are being developed on 5G. So we're doing a lot in automotive, as you'd probably imagine, where they want to develop new processes. And what they do is they use 5G in their R&D lab for exactly the reasons that we've heard from Corey and Richard about being able to use things like video and remote experts and VR and AR. They then develop it and then they move it into their production environment. Now, once you've done that, you can start to carve things up piecemeal, and we're seeing a number of different ones. One is they're using it for automation purposes. 2, they're using it to take advantage of the additional data. So they're using it as a higher bandwidth carrier. And I think what we're finding is that what IoT does, whether it's 2G, 4G or 5G is it drives waste out of the processes and enables you to improve the efficiency of your operational factory. But what we're seeing with 5G, it's enabling you to do new things at new time using new data and giving you new perspectives. So I think the ROI is very strong, and we're seeing it from complete factory builds from the bottom up, right the way down to SMEs doing very specific things where they're actually developing new processes using this technology, both to get a bit ahead, as we've heard about with companies in the UK, but also to understand how they roll it out in their manufacturing environment. So I think there's not just one ROI around 5G. I think there is a very strong ROI about how you automate your factory for the future. And that's much more the discussion that we have as Vodafone with many of our manufacturing clients.
Okay, thanks, Phil. And just, I mean, Richard, maybe perhaps if we move to you and discuss, in terms of the value and the impacts and this kind of stuff. And Corey talked around the kind of chaos coming out of these, these 5G connected machines and sensors and what have you. Just talk around that, and from an enterprise point of view, when everything is connected and everything is streaming, as presumably it will be, or the theory is it is one day, what happens and how should they contend with that? Just explain how enterprises will need to prepare, I guess, to get this right.
Absolutely, and I'm really happy that it's my turn on a question because I get to comment on a few of the other responses. So first of all, I want to go to what Stephen was saying earlier about it'll be this day and it'll be this next day, and I have to agree with Stephen in the sense that those of us that have been in the wireless industry are the victim. And so I'm the chief strategy officer and the chief marketing officer. I like to joke, and no offense to my marketing friends out there, that I have to shut off half my brain when I need to do the marketing side. Okay, so the reality is we have done ourselves a disservice in the wireless industry because we said that the migration from 2G to 3G, from 3G to 4G, 4G to 5G is going to do something really amazing. And when you think about it, the migrations from 2G to 3G to 4G were really about making a pipe bigger, but that was it, okay? The migration to 5G, now all my friends in the 3GPP organizations are blowing a gasket right now, but that's okay. Leave that aside for a moment. The difference with respect to 5G, however, is it is the convergence of another set of technologies that were built into the standards. And that other set of technologies embraces the ideas of edge computing, private networking day one built into the standards. So coming to Stephen's comment about 19-year-old factory facilities don't have 2G, well, that's okay. If you're trying to retrofit, if they don't have IP as an example, you have a radically different way of deploying private hybrid data center technologies as well as your access technologies inside of that factory. It's almost, you can think of it as a overlay. And I'll translate that for our friends in the audience here who are actually thinking about their capital investment. So it's all about the money at some level. You have massive, like manufacturing is capital intensive by definition, okay? Which means the idea of replacing a $250,000 or 200,000 pound piece of factory equipment to get the new one that is mobility enabled. In prior technologies, you'd be faced with almost a complete retrofit replacement strategy. Hard to make those economics work. With 5G, with edge computing and private networks, you have the ability to retrofit, as an example, a piece of cabled infrastructure, make it mobile, and put the intelligence into a data center that sits alongside it. So you can reuse a lot more of that capital that you've already invested. So the ROI actually is not just about the connectivity, it's about how that bundle of technologies radically changes the cost to reuse infrastructure you've already built. So I'll pause on that. With respect to whether or not enterprises are going to do all the things that we've talked about here, we commissioned a report with Analysis Mason. It wasn't a marketing report. We really wanted to know if manufacturing was going to be a strong target for the type of performance systems. And I will come to your question, I promise, James. And you know, it's publicly available. You can find it on the Accedian website. But we interviewed 200 companies around the world, and we were surprised at the level of interest and intent to radically change their networking technologies based on that cluster of game-changing technologies, and I just used a marketing word, that 5G brings to the table. Data explosion, right? So Corey gave us a frightening statistic about how much data one of these capital reused pieces of infrastructure that are retrofitted do. There is a very large data management problem associated with all of this. If you think about a digital twin, right? So a digital twin at a basic minimum, you know, has a real-time, at least 1080p HD video feed of everything that it sees all the time, right? What do you do with that data? So there's a whole branch and risk and forensics and insurance and reinsurance and, you know, all that kind of good stuff will come into play on the data management challenge. The other challenge that exists is these systems. And now this is where I start talking about Accedian for just a brief moment. These systems are incredibly complex. You're taking a cloud native architecture and you're asking it to run a physical layer network. We serve enterprise separately for performance management systems. If you take the most complex business critical application in an enterprise and you compare the complexity and the requirements for performance versus trying to run a physical layer network in a cloud native architecture, you have a 5x complexity challenge. And so your management systems for how you deliver that and how you monitor those systems and how you plug performance into the decision-making entities in the enterprise, super important and much, much more complex. So that data management challenge that Corey brought up, you're asking about, is real, and it's going to require a completely, you know, if you think about digital transformation, if you're not already digitally transformed in every aspect of your business process and practices, I would say don't go and do 5G for manufacturing operations on your factory floor. Get everything else right first, then come back and start thinking about developing a digital twin of an F-35 as an example.
Okay, Richard, thank you for that. Look, we're running up on time, but look, Corey, I want to come back to you, and you know, there is another side of the market which suggests that, you know, it's all gone hype mad around 5G and this kind of stuff. But you appear like, you know, an evangelist, you know, for this stuff, 5G and everything it supports, of course. You know, just talk to me around what whether or not you think there is too much focus on the technologies and too little on the solutions, or you think the balance is about right. And, you know, more importantly, you know, how should enterprises start down this road? Do you start small? Do you go big? Just give us a sense of that.
So, you know, people are interesting in that they achieve greatness by standing on the shoulders of others, and technology is no different. It's definitely a crawl, walk, run application, and I am excited, and I guess I am a bit of an evangelist because I see where we've been, I see where we are now, and what we're achieving and where we're going, and I think it's exciting. You know, and there's some elements here that weren't mentioned that I think that are crucial. You know, when we talked about, Richard was talking about 4G, there's a lot of people in rural areas, they still don't have 4G. In fact, they're lucky to have anything even below that. But the interesting thing is we're addressing those issues in I think a unique way. I'll give you just a quick example. Many of you probably read Lockheed Martin formed a collaborative relationship with Verizon last week, and its intent is focused towards the defense and government sector. And I think that's critical for a number of reasons, because one, government and defense operate in some of the most remote, austere areas you can think of. And so we're working to actually be able to develop those 5G nodes in those areas. I think the rural communities are going to benefit heavily from that. The other part of this too is security. Obviously, with defense, there's a huge focus on cyber. Lockheed is definitely one of the innovators and leaders in that area. And so being able to do that collaboratively with Verizon, I think there's a benefit that's going to go back to the general public and the security of all of that information that we're producing as well. So I am excited about the future because I'm, a lot of my family comes from rural areas and they're like, hey, what about us? Well, I'm excited when it's going to be able to affect them as well. The other thing too is we don't think about all the manufacturing that is also in rural areas, and they don't get to benefit from some of the these benefits like you do in some of the more dense cities, et cetera. We're going to be able, I feel, to change that, and that's going to be such an exponentially additive factor for all of those. James, going to your question about, do you start large? Do you start small? I think it is, with these capabilities, you can go either. And I don't think you have to have the mega factory to truly employ it. We mentioned Skunkworks early on. If you think about it, they are the small production facility, but they are one of the most advanced in the world. It was only a few years ago that they literally designed an aircraft from off the computer into a full production and operational within a single year. That's, anyone who's ever dealt with the aviation community with any platform knows that's just unparalleled. But I think that's where we're going. And I think the smaller factories are going to be able to employ these technologies where, and we've been working with a number of them, it's not just production of perhaps one product. It's now these capabilities are going to allow you to perhaps produce 2 and 3 products in that same factory, in that same footprint, which is very expensive to begin with.
Okay, look, I'm going to have to cut this short. We started 3 minutes late. We're finishing 6 minutes late as well. And I feel like I've got to apologize to Phil. We didn't get more time with you. I feel like you at least one question. I've got a whole bunch of questions here which we haven't got to. But what do you know? Covering at least 4 subjects, really dense subjects in half an hour is a tough call. But look, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and ideas and your time with us today. And and for those who are watching, perhaps we'll catch up later. I'm moderating another session in an hour or so. But look, thank you very much, and we'll catch you all soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.